Assalamu alaikum everyone, peace be with you. This is Alman Nusrat and
this is Nihal Khan, everyone. Assalamu alaikum, how are y'all doing? Welcome to episode 0 of Faith in Fine Print. And we are here in Hartford, Connecticut at Story and Soil Coffee, arguably the best coffee shop in all of Connecticut.
Cool. We are doing this episode basically without a producer right now, so we're going to be doing this as we go.
We are going to be doing this as we go. Alman, let's get straight into it. Me and you started the podcast with the intention of combining. We mentioned something very specifically about combining between art and academics. I think that was a constant theme that me and you were talking about combining between different aspects of the Muslim community and Islamic studies, and also talking about it from a perspective that combines between the artistic matters as well, issues related to culture, issues related to how people interact with each other, issues of community. But I think the thing which we want to mainly talk about is both of us, like what are we about? What is our background for people that we want them to tune into our podcast? What should we be providing them? And I think today we want to talk about it from the perspective of our knowledge and our experiences.
Right.
So let me talk to you. So we have Alman Nusrat, singer-songwriter. He also manages a space called the Mantle, which is also the sponsor of this podcast. And the thing that we want to talk about is, Alman, from your time abroad, from your studies here, what do you hope to achieve with the podcast?
Okay, so basically with the podcast, as a singer-songwriter, I had this experience with the arts, dealing with arts and culture. And what I wanted to do was basically create a platform. Well, with the Mantle, it was to create a space that basically brought people together to kind of increase awareness about, the fact that culture is an important thing, the arts and culture are important things. And we want to create a space where people don't feel judged, they don't feel hesitant when it comes to learning about spirituality and faith. And in a place where we have quality education, qualified scholars and instructors and teachers from all different backgrounds. And I think having a place like that that's inclusive, that is comfortable and safe, I think that's very much needed, and it very much helps people navigate their spirituality and to develop spiritually. So my idea was to create that space because, once again, having a background as a singer-songwriter, I realized that culture really plays a role in how we experience our lives and how we engage with our religion in the first place. So basically, an example of that is, Islam here is different than Islam in India, and different than Islam in Africa, in African countries. Meaning, like, Islam at its root is the same. We have the laws, but in terms of its cultural practice and how people engage, it's different. And that's something that I find really important. I want to bring that to light so that people see this religion as one that is not culturally predatory, but one that is understanding and one that encompasses. There's one of my teachers uses this metaphor of, Islam is like a clear water, like a clear stream, and it takes on the color of whatever's underneath. So when you go to China, you have Chinese-looking mosques, and when you're so the question is, and in other countries, when you go to India, you have Indian-looking mosques in different kind of places. So the question is, what does an American experience look like as Muslims? What does that look like? And so we created the Mantle. We're creating this podcast to have those discussions, to talk to artists, to talk to educators, to talk to academics, and see, basically just try to understand that experience, Yeah.
It's funny, you mentioned something about the idea of water, right? That Islam is like water, which goes back to the idea of the Sharia, right? Which in today's political discourse is like a major talking point that a lot of like members of Congress, I remember, I think it was in Tennessee, it was like, oh, we have passed a bill that does not let Muslims practice the Sharia, right? And they're always talking about Sharia law, but It's you actually understood what that referred to. It refers to the general process of how Muslims like live and breathe. So for example, to be good to someone, to be kind to someone would be part of like the law, the Sharia, which literally refers to a stream of water. It literally refers to how water takes the shape of the stream that it's in, and as it flows down into areas, right, with a sense of ease, with a sense of calmness, with a sense of clarity. But that aspect doesn't get spoken about. And I think this kind of goes into the second part of it. I remember when we were trying to start the podcast, we were thinking about a name, and we came up with the idea of faith in fine print. And I think the thing that we wanted to specifically highlight is the fine print, is where people on one end get lost in the fine print, and they completely overlook what their faith ought to be telling them, like the spirit of the law. But then on the other end, people may take things at a very literal level and get lost in what the objectives of the faith are. So at one point, not reading the fine print can harm you, but also getting too lost in the fine print will take you away from what the actual objectives are. Right. And I think that's something that we ought to understand. But trying to move forward with the podcast and try to understand it in a holistic manner. But what does that, I mean, I think I told you from my end, right, what faith in fine print means, but from your end, what do you hope for the podcast to be able to accomplish?
I just want it to be a platform where people can just learn more about the people in our community and the things that they do, the diversity that's there. And hopefully it inspires them to kind of look within and understand their strengths, understand their weaknesses, understand where they are in life, and then use that to their advantage, right? So maybe inspire people to learn more about their faith and learn more about these topics that, people like to water down. But things aren't so simple. This is for anyone who like wants things to be like clear cut and just like, this is how it is for everyone. They're not going to really like Islam, because Islam has a lot of, there's certain fundamentals, and then there's a lot of, okay, well, what's your opinion on that? And what are the scholars' opinions on that? How did they interpret these things? Because a lot of people, and this is for a lot of young listeners, whenever I've approached people and I talk about learning Islamic law or anything like that, people just go like, oh, that just gets too complicated. I'm just going to follow Quran and Sunnah. And it's like, wait, hold on. What do you mean follow Quran and Sunnah? Because that, through whose lens?
Yeah.
Right? Because you're telling me that you understand Arabic as it was understood 1400 years ago, and you're telling me you have access to all of those tools like grammar and logic, like all of those things, and that's not possible. And so then you have to understand, okay, whenever you are engaging with religion, you're actually looking through someone's lens. Because ideas are not without their roots. Ideas stem from somewhere. And I think it's really important in our times to understand where ideas come from. The way we look at the world, the way we understand the world, so much of that is the result of what we've been fed growing up, right? We're fed a certain worldview. An example of that would be, for example, in America, like we're taught to be very independent. We're taught to, write our own destiny. And basically we have the nuclear family. We have, capitalism. We have ideas based on these things, and it's like it shapes the way we see the world. It shapes the way we view ourselves. It shapes the way we view our relationship to the planet, for example, right? Like we should be better towards the planet. But if you, and the wisdom behind that, for example, in the Islamic tradition, it's like the universe, the plants and the animals, all these things, that is like the blueprint. And within ourselves, there's a blueprint. We're all connected. We're connected to nature in a very big way. And we have to understand those things. But if we separate those things, like there's no relationship between me and the tree or the animal or anything, then we abuse and then we lose our way. So, I know I'm getting a bit off track, but my idea here is, with my intention with the organization, with the podcast, is to start to deconstruct and then start to construct again. Figure out where we are wrong in our thinking and our approach, open up our minds, open up our understanding, and then come back and then really see this faith for all the beauty that it contains and what it teaches us about ourselves and essential human nature.
Yeah, I think also the idea is for us to explore the assumptions that we may hold about ourselves. Like exploring the assumptions we may hold about ideas, and also understanding and going back to the fact that we may hold a lot of what's the word I'm looking for? We may hold a lot of, I guess assumptions would be the right word, or biases rather, right? About our faith, which we have not explored, which we do not understand, which we have like not gone into depth and understanding. And we've kind of been on cruise control. I guess that's the best way to look at it. But the point of the podcast is for people to kind of take a step back, recognize the diversity that exists within our tradition, within our faith, and within our community, highlight that, and become what I like to say, I think I've mentioned this before, to become conflict comfortable, right? People are very conflict averse, or they're very conflict prone, but there's nothing wrong with becoming conflict comfortable, where there may be like two things at odd, right? I know when we were speaking to Suhaib Webb, right? He had mentioned in one episode that he's literally gotten death threats from right-wing Islamophobes, right? And then he's also gotten a death threat from like ISIS, right? And it's just like, it shows you that there are two groups of people who may be on the opposite spectrums of this, a similar form of bias and a similar form of rhetoric, which is what you cannot be American and you cannot be Muslim. Which this may kind of go a little off subject, but I think the community in the last presidential election, or the current presidential election that's going on for 2020, like the Muslim community has been very much either heavily speaking, either leaning towards Bernie Sanders or towards Elizabeth Warren for whatever reason. And I've noticed that a lot of people will kind of like be at each other's throats talking about it. But I'm like, dude, if you cannot be respectful in talking to the other person, regardless of how much you disagree with them, if you cannot engage with them, with their ideas, with their ideologies, then are you not falling to the same level as somebody who may be a bit more of a demagogue, or somebody who just doesn't want to understand another person? And that also brings in something else. The community in 2020 America, the Muslim community specifically, has grown in a way which it's not just existing on a faith spectrum. It also exists on a social spectrum, on an economic spectrum, on an ethnic spectrum, on a cultural spectrum. And that's not an issue of it being right or wrong. That's an issue of a reality that we have to face and try to talk to and address.
I think going back to like what you said about people being conflict comfortable.
Yeah.
Something that comes to mind from personal experience, but also dealing with people, just at a basic level, why is it that someone gets fired up?
Yeah.
Why is it that someone gets so uncomfortable? Or the word I use is insecure. People get insecure probably, okay, this probably just sounds, they get insecure because they're not confident about what they're talking about. They're not confident about the subject matter. I mean, if you were, then you would be, okay, let's say some people are hot-tempered, whatever, but even so, if you're having an intellectual discourse, leaving emotions out of it and talking about just facts or, understanding something, then you wouldn't be all riled up. You would rather kind of be like, okay, I understand that point. Let me pick that apart, knowing, having the knowledge I have. Most people, I would say even in the Muslim community, don't have access to that knowledge. They don't understand why they think the way they think, or what the justification behind their beliefs. So many people would argue that, but once again, because of the narrative that we've been given growing up, that atheism or being agnostic would be like the standard, that's the intelligent thing to do.
Right.
And believing in something, believing in God, would be like kind of like, where's your proof? There's zero proof for that. There's zero intellectual discourse regarding the existence, like credible discourse or anything. And that's just not true. We have a history of, especially in the Islamic tradition, we have 1400 years, we have centuries of thinkers and philosophers and scientists talking about the proofs of God, and breaking apart arguments, right? Arguments that like Sam Harris would like present, right? Have been deconstructed a long time ago.
Islam is the motherlode of bad ideas.
Right. So like these kinds of things. And as Muslims, we sometimes are complacent. We don't really understand what we're being programmed to think or believe, even about ourselves. An example of this would be like the show Messiah on Netflix, right? Yeah. In the show, I saw it, and my understanding of it was like, okay, interesting. I'm just watching it, I'm consuming it. And then I realized afterwards that the narrative in that show is that one verse from the Quran can be used to brainwash someone and and that just for some reason makes sense in a narrative.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's zero like depth to it. It's just like, yeah, some guy used one verse and brainwashed a kid, and now he's gonna go bomb someone, right? It's like, that's crazy. But somehow, me as a Muslim, I'm watching that and I'm like, yeah, it makes sense, because I'm like, we're so used to seeing that narrative. It's like, okay, but even we start to think that about ourselves, or we start to think strange things. And so once again, one of the goals of the podcast is to like understand ourselves, understand where we come from, understand the work that we're doing and how it's relevant to the world we live in. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think hopefully what I hope to bring here, so for those of you that don't know, my background is in psychology. I did an undergrad degree in psychology. I minored in business, and then I went overseas to India, and I completed my Alamiya degree at Darul Uloom Nadwatul Ulama in Lucknow, India. And I work here in Connecticut as a director of religious affairs. So I'm hoping that me and Alman can have conversations, and even between both of us, right? We may not agree on everything. But the point is not to start an echo chamber for us to agree on everything. The point is to recognize the conflicts that may arise in some of the ideas that we may hold, and is to work through them through dialogue and through speaking to each other as opposed to speaking at each other.
Right.
And I think that's become a common trope of the community. Everyone is talking at each other. Like, you open up your phone, right? You go on like social media. Like, I think I was mentioning this to you. Me and Alman and a bunch of us went to go record somewhere in New York, and I didn't look at my social media all day, and it looks like such an awesome feeling. Like, we went and recorded like all these different people, and we had a wonderful time, had some good food, and then like after being out for like 12 hours or 14 hours, I opened up the internet. And it's like, dude, everyone's just like yelling at each other, screaming at each other. No, you're wrong. No, you're dumb. No, you don't know what you're talking about. Right. It's like, oh my God. And this is the nonsense we're consuming every day.
Right.
And with Ramadan around the corner, the point is to give people something to consume that would be fruitful, that will make you not just feel good. I think we already have this culture of a feel-good culture, but like the feel-good culture that we have is that we give people junk food, not soul food, right? And we need to get into that culture of whatever content we're giving people to consume, it should be uplifting themselves and their souls and their minds, know. And I hope that we can kind of get into that, hopefully.
For sure. I think a lot of it is going to come down to, what am I going to say here? What am I trying to say? I'm trying to think. It's been a long day.
It has.
But anyways, going back to the podcast, what we're aiming to do here, like you're saying, is open that box of ideas so that we can communicate, be comfortable with differences of opinion, which I think we really, really need. And really, and also in terms of consumption, we have to be aware of what we're consuming.
Yeah.
Going back to my point earlier about, the Netflix show, you just have to be aware that, like, whatever we consume, whatever we're taking in, there's something being fed to us.
Yeah.
And like you said, it's better for that to, in a beneficial way, feed our souls as opposed to a detrimental way.
Yeah.
With the junk that's out there. And, being a singer-songwriter, being an artist, like, I have to be careful with, how I understand art, and because it is relevant. Art and culture is totally relevant, and it's necessary. It's how ideas are communicated. It's how hearts connect to certain truths. And so my hope is that I can bring in that side of things, and try to, and not just make it a completely intellectual thing, but something that also has emotion, something that's real, that's rooted in reality, because we can just talk about purely just the ideas or the concepts or something, but connecting it to us on a human level is also important.
Actually, I was going to ask you, I know for a lot of people may not know this, but as a singer-songwriter, people probably just think you're like sitting in your mom's basement, like with a guitar or something like that. But like, you actually went out and you traveled the world literally doing what you've been doing. You spent time in England, you spent time in Dubai, you spent time, I don't know where else. But like, I know you spent time with Cat Stevens with Yusuf Islam. Can you tell us about that a little bit? And then we can take a little bit of a break after.
Yep. So yeah, I had the honor of spending some time with Yusuf Islam, but also his some members of his management team. And it taught me a lot about, the biggest thing was about what it means to be in service, what it means to be authentic, and how, what it just, yeah, those two things would be like the biggest things, right? What it means to be authentic, meaning as an artist who also has a faith and practices and stuff, you know, how am I presenting that to the world? Am I putting on a mask? Am I being fake? You know, what's going on when I partake in my craft and when I'm in the public eye? And then the other thing is service. You know, there's my history with my father, and when he passed away, that taught me a lot about taking care of someone. But spending the time with Yusuf Islam and his team, I saw that they really cared about the work that they're doing. They cared about what ideas they were putting out there, and it was a real demonstration of what it looks like when someone is practicing their faith, but also like an artist and someone who's creating content and all of that. So it was just a really cool experience to be a part of that. And then those interactions and creating my own album and a couple albums and doing tours and shows wherever around the world, that once again opened me up to that, to be culturally aware, opened me up to the experiences of Muslims around the world, and what they go through. And it also actually taught me that although people may be kind of separated by language barriers or culture, human beings are similar, are the same at the fundamental levels. We all want to be loved. We all have certain wishes and wants. We all want a sense of security, and traveling around, and that's something that helped me write my songs as well, right? Because when I write a song, I can't be so specific that no one can relate to it, but something that's relatable, and you tap into that through spirituality, through understanding what people experience and the commonalities that exist between all of us. So yeah, the experiences with him, his team, the last 10 years, I would say, of just all of this stuff has really kind of helped me understand my place, my role as an artist. Yeah.
Nice. So to our listeners, the one thing that we're expecting is that taking somebody who has been involved in the arts and working with someone who's involved in the community like myself, we hope to produce content and discussions which are fruitful. We hope to be able to engage and connect with the community by talking about things that matter. Inshallah, for those of you that are listening, this is the first episode. In the coming episodes, you will find content recorded revolving around people that they may know, you may know, or you may not know, but pretty cool subjects on how Islamophobia is reported upon, learning Islam in the digital age, anti-blackness and racism. There's one episode that we're going to have dedicated to female leadership, one episode talking about how to connect to your faith through sports. We recorded somebody that plays for the Yukon Huskies. So we're hoping people can connect and they can grow through their faith, in this upcoming year, and hope that they can come out from that. I guess with that, we can take a short break and then get right back into it.
Yeah. See you on the other side of the break. We have a message from our sponsor, The Mantle, and here is that message. Here we go.
Hey listeners, wondering what The Mantle is? The Mantle is an organization based in Fairfield County, Connecticut. We are dedicated to creating sacred spaces that facilitate the understanding of Islamic spirituality. The Mantle aims to revive the prophetic tradition of understanding, compassion, and spiritual cultivation. We encourage authenticity in exchange for authenticity. Come as you are to learn Islam as it is. Find out more about The Mantle by following us online on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at Mantle of Love. We hope you enjoy the rest of this episode of Faith in Fine Print.